We're moving on now to another conversation. It is going to be Gary McGann, who needs no introduction, Chairman of Aon, amongst many, many other accolades and achievements in his business life. And he's going to be in conversation with Leo Clancy. And they're going to be talking just about the opportunities for Ireland, not just for investment, but in particular for impact investment. So I'm going to hand it over to you, gentlemen, and best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. This is much more important than the previous one because you have two much better speakers. So to clarify the situation, I'm going to be asking the questions and Leo is going to be answering the questions so that I get the tough job. The subject is Ireland as an investment location, and it's very obviously apt to be talking about this with the global advisory members of Venturewave Capital, and indeed our great friends from Bank of America, Paul and Fernando. You're most welcome. Our guest expert on this subject area is Leo Clancy. To most people, he needs no introduction. He's CEO of Enterprise Ireland. He's had a huge experience in the public and private sector, and basically looks after the well-being of the reputation of Ireland Inc. on a daily basis. You might think he doesn't look stressed, but behind that calm veneer, he has carrying a lot on his shoulders. So Leo, great to have you, and thank you for doing this. Can I start maybe with the subject of infrastructure? I think you're just back a few days from one of your many international trips. Can I ask you what the external perspective of Ireland is today? We hear of many issues in relation to infrastructure deficits, and the question is this a significant inhibitor to investment and to doing business from Ireland? Or indeed, is there confidence that we actually know the problem and know how to get out of it?
So, Gary, first of all, you've teed it up for me very well with that introduction. I'm just waiting to trip over into one of your questions now after that. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the organisers, to Kieran, to Alan and the team for having me here. Also, commend the Global Advisory Council. It's very unique that we have such a senior gathering into Ireland, and we really treasure it. Also, Bank of America for the sponsorship you've made, so Anne, Paul in particular, and Fernando, such an amazing leader for Bank of America here in Ireland. So thank you very much for sponsoring and bringing together this team. I'm not avoiding your question, Gary. So
I was going to say, we're now at 12:50.
I'm going to be kept on T. So infrastructure came up in almost every meeting we had last week on West Coast of the US. It comes up in a lot of meetings. It is certainly an area of concern. The concern is variously the length of time things take in planning and then the time it takes to execute. I always say this in the context of we can always do better on infrastructure build, and I think there's a couple of very positives to that. First positive is that there is massive demand to invest in Ireland. If we go back 10 years ago, there was a gigawatt of headroom on our electricity grid, for instance, and that headroom no longer exists, so it's a constraint, but it means that economic activity in the meantime has taken up a lot of the available capacity. It's up to us now to build more, so it wouldn't diminish that problem. But the appetite to invest in Ireland and to build out on top of an infrastructure play is fantastic. There's also recognition, I think with the budget yesterday, there was a very strong signal sent on water and electricity in particular, and continuing on housing. And I think that's going to be vital to how we go forward. So global investors are very savvy, and many of you in the room will know it takes time to build large infrastructure. What people want to know is that you want to do it, and that you want to be competitive. And I think no one is in any doubt that Ireland wants to do it. I think the question is, can we do it fast enough for the investor demand?
Very good. Sounds a confident position. Can I turn to the subject that's very relevant to this room, the subject of entrepreneurship? From your experience, how entrepreneurial is our psyche in this country? And is the business and the general social environment supportive of entrepreneurs? And have you any examples of how that actually works in practice?
I think, well, you and I were fortunate enough to have a conversation just off stage with John Beckett around his entrepreneurship around the Nature Fund that he created. And that's just a brilliant example of how an Irish entrepreneur with Get Up and Go gets up and does something innovative, different. I remember when John was starting this, I was at IDA at the time, probably just before pandemic, John, I'd say. And it was a from the ground up idea about how you do a carbon solution, and really incredible effort to take it from zero to done. I think those those experiences are replicated. James, I know, spoke earlier from Exocean. That's just an incredible solution to a problem that is holding back infrastructure build around the world. You've heard from yourself, so I won't repeat what Exocean does. I know Edge and others will be up later, and I see around the room a lot of the Endeavour entrepreneurs, Brendan Nowd and others. Endeavour now has 11 Irish entrepreneurs, I think, maybe 12. Sorry, I probably got the number wrong, with apologies to Endeavour and to Edge. Those entrepreneurs are some of the best examples of what Ireland produces. If you take Barry Napier as one of the earliest, Amy Connolly, who I was with at an event on Monday, with her business, one of the latest entrepreneurs, we are oozing with entrepreneurial talent in Ireland, and I think really to our credit, actually, I think we're at a high watermark. You asked me earlier, are we going forward? What's their past tell us about today and where we're at, and particularly what do we think about the future? I'm hugely ambitious for the future. I think we're at a high watermark of ambition. We've always had brilliant companies. You've worked in Smurfit, and we have brilliant Irish companies that have become global leaders, but actually I think we're at a high watermark of distribution of ambition and competence now. We have more entrepreneurs in more volume with more ambition than we have ever had.
And staying with that subject, given that I think you and I have talked about this before, like this country is privileged to have on the US stock exchanges now the largest sports betting and gaming company in the world, the largest basic materials company in the world, and the largest paper packaging company in the world. Do you envisage, from what you see in the spread of entrepreneurship, the potential for the future for those companies to grow and stay in that growth factor rather than just selling out and becoming part of somewhere that's diffused?
I do. I think we have companies that are on that journey that will achieve that. I think the ambition and the skill to achieve those journeys. We also have the largest clinical research organization in the world, probably the largest specialist food company in the world. We underestimate what we've already built in Ireland, and I think we have amazing companies that will continue that journey. And increasingly, we're seeing Irish companies, even in the 50s and 60s and up to early hundreds of revenue, who are raising money to be acquirers of others. And we see companies also that are refinancing themselves through multiple private equity rounds. You can see the government support that's come in the budget this week around things like IPO expenses being offset, further investment in EIS. I think there's wind behind us. I don't think all of these things are at the level we would eventually want them to be at, but I think the ambition among Irish companies to be the acquirers, the growers, and have that global reach is really high at the moment. And we've been looking at this in the context of what Enterprise Ireland can do to support scaling firms. Some of it is building networks with people like yourselves who can help bring that global knowledge to companies, and people have been incredibly generous with their time in that regard. Some of it is practical things. So we've had a Leadership for Growth course for the last nearly 20 years now. And that's a high-end leadership course for CEO ambition, and we've had people go through that increasingly saying that the step change in their ambition and their ability to think about their company's future from when they started to when it ended is dramatically increased. We're in the early stages of forming up what would be a much larger cohort-based leadership program for a smaller number. We have 30 people a year go through our Leadership for Growth. We're looking at a smaller number who might go through a much more scaled leadership program. We're looking at what we can do potentially with ISIF and maybe ourselves around scaling funds and areas like that, go-to-market plans and focused help to companies. But the main support is rooms like this working together and people accessing advice. I sat with a brilliant startup at lunch outside who's getting advice, and he named all the people in this room, people with less than no time, like Dennis and Brendan, and I won't call out their names, but you all know who you are, and you're helping Conrad in Maverick to build his business when he's just got to 8 people. I mean, that he can access such senior people to think about how he scales his business. That's globally unique. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a real generosity of spirit, I think.
There really is.
Hopefully we're not pulling the ladders up, we're actually sending them down. There are many things that people will describe as the basis of how we've got from a predominantly agrarian society to a very progressive social liberal environment and a very progressive business environment. And those X factors were classically built off very talented, well-educated people who were mobile, weren't afraid to travel, were generally friendly with most people they could find. English speaking, as somebody described, I went to an all-Irish school, so I was illiterate in 2 languages, but most other people were a bit better than that. Competitive tax benefits, members of the EU, etc. Some of those are obviously, there's been a catch-up and or a normalisation. What do you think the X factors are for those looking at Ireland today from the inside out and outside in?
So two, I think, on the personal individual level, Irish people. I think, and again, we heard this last week, every meeting, talent. You know, if you talk about infrastructure challenge, we want more, we're happy with what we have. Talent, everyone's saying we want more of that. Your talent is incredible. And what people say about Irish talent is pragmatic, can-do attitude, no problem too big, but really good consideration of what can be done. So I think our talent still remains our X factor. The other bit and it manifests itself in our politics as well and in the attitude towards business, is that can-do business attitude. So a business-friendly environment, stable rule of law, we've had that for so long, and we really at our peril would take that for granted. The answer I gave 2 years ago in Singapore when I was asked, why does Ireland invest so much in things like EI and IDA? This was from someone from another country in a very, very diverse group who hadn't an agency like ours or IDAs. And I said, gave an answer I'd never given before or thought about. It's because my parents went to school with kids who didn't have shoes on their feet. So within living memory in Ireland, we remember the consequences of the lack of economic opportunity. And I think if there's a danger to us, it's that we forget that. That we forget that having economic opportunity is not something we can take for granted, and that we've transformed our society now to the stage where we are doing well and we need to continue to do well. So that's the national psyche X factor.
And presumably building on that, I mean, the one thing that sometimes I think we forget is we still are a small island off the west coast of Europe that hasn't yet harvested wind energy as probably the only natural resource. We haven't discovered gold in the Wicklow Hills, and probably the real asset is walking around on 2 feet. Looking forward, the kind of 2 big subject areas in any walk of life now are sustainability, the whole issue of climate change, decarbonisation, alternative energy, and so on, and then the world of AI. And somebody described the mantra for Ireland should be sustainable digitalisation. Given the challenge around infrastructure, for example, with data centres, and given the challenges we've heard from previous panels on getting the wind energy to an advanced stage, how well do you think we can play in these spaces, and do you believe they are right for us?
I think they're absolutely right for us. So I brought a prop today. It's a book that's not yet published called The Customer is the Planet, and by Donald Daly, who many of you know, a very strong software entrepreneur. So Donald, it's a collection of essays, but it breaks down the CSRD into its component parts. So it's a handbook for sustainable business, but The Customer is the Planet comes from his chat with his 15-year-old son a couple of years ago, wondering what his future would look like. So I think Irish people are very tuned in to the land, as you mentioned, agrarian society, respectful of it, and really see sustainability as something intrinsic to how business is done. It's not universal. It's certainly under challenge around the world. I think it's a huge area. You heard from James earlier, we're seeing an explosion of sustainability-oriented businesses. It is the fastest growing sector we've seen for the last 2 years in terms of jobs and exports, and I think it'll continue to accelerate. On AI, I think we're incredibly well placed. The proposition we built over the last 10 years in data protection, now mapping into the AI Act and how Ireland is placed to regulate the data. So AI is a technology which is going to be smaller employment in relative terms because it's the LLMs and the number of people involved in those is relatively small. The big industry here will be data. How you manage data, how you curate data, how you make data work for you in the business. We are the best place, at least in Europe, potentially in the world, for the skill base around data. You know, possible exception of the west coast of the United States and San Francisco specifically, we're incredibly well placed. We have a data center build capability in Ireland, which is second to none. We built all of and for a very long time, the only EMEA data centers for all of Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, when they were growing as hyperscalers. We have a community of building contractors, people who do the mechanelec, people who do the systems and racking and everything else that is the envy of the world and is now traveling the world to build data centers, as well as the site reliability engineers and the people within the Googles and Microsofts who can build them. So I think as we combine that data and the physical data center capabilities we have, there's a huge future for Ireland in this.
Well, to wrap it up, it sounds like you're optimistic. So I won't give you my bear case, but I'm minded of Winston Churchill accused one of his civil servants when he was Minister for War in the Second World War of marching determinedly backward into the future. It doesn't sound like that's where you're going. Thank you, Leo. Well done, and thanks for the work you do for Ireland.
Thanks, Gary.
Well done. Excellent job.
Thank you very, very much.